I left the walker back there because the aisle's so narrow, but I am now the second crippled 72-year-old. My name is Paul Henry Abram. I'm a fisherman. I practiced law for 37 years, criminal defense, in 16 death penalty cases. I never had a conviction. And I quit the practice of law, we call it. I never did perfect it, but I practiced the hell out of it. I quit that practice about 7 years ago, and now I am very happily retired. Drove me to writing books. I have a book that's completed. It's a nonfiction, narrative nonfiction about a strike that I handled, labor union strike handled back in 1970, which is in the process of being reviewed and edited and whatnot.